Hi there, this video is going to introduce index numbers, and index numbers are a really important part of an economist's toolkit because they allow us to make comparisons between pieces of data that otherwise might be quite hard to compare. So we're going to run through a little bit of an example so you can see actually how index numbers are used, but before that let's just kind of write down clearly what it is that we're dealing with here. So an index number is an indicator, and it shows the relative value of one number to the other from a base. Those are the kind of important aspects. You'll see why as we come back to it. But firstly, the idea of relative, that's about, you know, that's what I was talking about earlier in terms of comparing things with one another, because we're talking about relative values. And then the other one is that we use a base. Normally when we do this, we're talking about time, so we have a base year. So we're talking about kind of relative changes in relation to a base year. So what we're going to look at then is we're going to look at a little bit of real-world numerical data taken from the World Bank so we can see how index numbers can help us. So what we've got here is the GDP in current US dollars for Ethiopia and China. Now the question that we're going to be looking at addressing here in this little video is which economy has performed better in terms of GDP since 2006. So this data comes from the World Bank, and it's really difficult to tell just by looking at these numbers actually what's going on here. You know, these numbers are so big, so many values involved, it's really difficult to actually kind of look at these numbers and try and figure out what's been going on in each of these economies. Now, we can try and improve this a little bit by looking at it in a graph, but as you'll see, that's not especially helpful to us here. So this is that same data shown in a time series graph. So you've got years along the bottom, and then we've got the GDP values up the side, and you can see that we've got kind of the Chinese line growing up here. The Ethiopian line is this blue one right at the bottom here that basically doesn't move very much at all. So normally, you know, we would make a data table like this easier to understand by turning it into a line chart. But as you can see here, that doesn't really work because the Chinese economy is just so much bigger than the Ethiopian one. It's very difficult to actually get a sense of which one relatively has performed better. So what we can do then is we can index these numbers. And what we can basically say is if we set it up somehow so that we are resetting these values from 2006 to be our base, what has happened since then? So what we're trying to do essentially is standardize the starting point for each of these countries, so that we are only considering what has happened from 2006 onwards. And this is a process of generating index numbers. And the way that we do it is a relatively simple formula. Is we take so first thing we do, I suppose, is that we decide on what we call our base year. Now this is the one where we are going to kind of hold the values constant. Now for us it's going to be 2006. You often do it with the first year of the comparison you're trying to draw. So 2006, and we are going to set it to 100. That's the normal way that we do it. And the way that we do that is that we divide the actual value by the base year value, and then we multiply that by 100. Now, as you can see, if you do that for the first year, you've got the actual value, which is the base year value, divided by the base year value multiplied by 100. So you've got a number divided by itself multiplied by 100. So that's always going to give us 100. So that's how we set the base year. But then as the changes occur after that, we will be able to get a much clearer representation of what's going on. So let's see how that works in practice then by doing that on this data. So we'll move these up a little bit. I'll nudge them just to the top of the screen like that. We can refer back to them afterwards. And so let's bring in the indexed data then and see if that makes it easier to understand. So this data that we've got at the bottom here, this is the data which is showing us now the indexed values. So when we've gone through this process and we have done this formula and applied it to each of these values, we end up with the table that you can see here. And firstly, you can see that doing this process has made the numbers much much more clear, and it's made the trends much more clear. So we can see actually what has been going on. So we can see that, for instance, in China, this has grown at a relatively consistent rate. In Ethiopia, it grows up to here, then it has a dip, and then it recovers quite strongly after that. So it makes the trends much more apparent than they were just in the raw data. And similarly, when we then apply those indexed values onto a line chart, again, you can see that we start both lines at this point here, because we set 2006 to be our base year of 100. So both of the lines start from the same point, and we are just considering what's happened since then. And again, it makes the trends much easier for us to see. You'll notice that the Chinese line hasn't really changed very much at all. But by doing this process, we have brought the Ethiopian line into a position where we can actually compare it. Two things that kind of stand out to me looking at this line. Firstly, the Ethiopian one appears to be more volatile. It kind of increases more rapidly initially, then declines, then increases more rapidly again. And actually, if we were looking at simply the economic performance in terms of GDP growth since 2006, that would be a very simplistic indicator. But if we were doing that, then actually we can see that Ethiopia has done slightly better over this period than China. We can see that both of the economies have done very well. Both of them have quadrupled in size, or grown by about 300%. So both of the economies have done very well. Indeed, they are the two best performing economies on this basis over this time period. But the purpose of this video really was to just demonstrate how useful the process of indexation can be when it comes to understanding how things have changed relative to one another. And importantly, it allows us to compare things which otherwise would be very difficult to compare. In this case, the rate of GDP growth of Ethiopia and China. So the formula here is important. It's a relatively simple one, and it's very easy to do on Excel or on a spreadsheet or something like that. That's probably the easiest way of doing it. But you can do it yourself long-handed if you want to. But it's the actual value. So if I was working out, for instance, the index value for 2015 for Ethiopia, I take that number there, which is what have we got? 61,537,143,095. That's my actual value. I divide it by my base year, 15,280,861,835, and then I multiply the number that I get out of that by 100. And when I do that, I reach this indexed value down here of 402.71, and that means that the value in 2015 is just a shade over 4 times what it was in 2006.